And then 12 months later, we're in this position where I think we spent about 28% less on paid ads last year and decreased acquisition costs by 14%, which is crazy because everybody's complaining about rising ad costs right now. And then we also hit 2 times our pipeline goal. So we were meant to hit 440 SQLs last year. And we hit right around 800. And so for me, it was a big success.
How did you stumble across Primer?
Yeah, that's a good question. We actually had a guy who used to work at KlientBoost's, learned pretty much everything that I know about paid ads from him, a guy called Harrison Carroll. And he was in conversation with you guys. He'd had a lot of clients asking him questions around how they could improve targeting, specifically outside of LinkedIn at that point. So B2B clients that want to reach ICPs on B2C channels like Meta, YouTube. So he sent a message to one of our group chats on Slack and said to everybody, hey, here's this tool. At the time, metadata were the big players in the space. And we'd actually been using metadata, not seen decent results at all. So, it was easy for us to be like, oh, there's a new tool that can do this better. It makes a ton of sense. And also at that time, I was still working a lot of accounts. And same problem where I had loads of clients that were trying to plan channel expansion strategy without having to rely on the notoriously bad inbuilt audiences for B2B specifically in Meta and Google. Then I started pitching Primer to clients, but I guess the actual true Primer love story started when I took over marketing at KlientBoost's 12 months ago. I was like, okay, finally I can just run this Primer play the way that I've envisioned it without anybody breaking it.
Tell me about that. What was your vision for how marketing should work? That you wanted to...
I wouldn't necessarily call it my vision. I think a lot of it's pulled from my experience working accounts for a crazy amount of time. But one thing that was super clear to me, especially as I started specializing more in B2B, was that the funnel-based marketing just really wasn't working for a lot of companies. I don't think it's a horrifically bad concept, the idea that, you generate awareness with top funnel content, and then your goal is to try and nurture them to be customers. But the practical application of it in ad platforms was that B2Bs would just spend way too much time overthinking what warrants a top of funnel touch point, what warrants a middle of funnel touch point, and what warrants a bottom of funnel touch point. Companies would just post all this top of funnel content that doesn't talk about the product, doesn't really talk about the problems that the company solves. So then they have these paid ads engines that don't generate any pipeline because there literally is no pipeline because it didn't do the core job of marketing. And what would happen is they would try and optimize ad platforms for these kind of, I call them mythical funnels, where you've just created a buyer journey that doesn't match the reality of whether somebody's actually in market or out market. Then another great dude, he's working over at OmniLab right now, Tony Flores. He was kind of developing his own philosophy around demand generation and how it works. And he kind of introduced me to this new theory of audience penetration and frequency. The goal of marketing is less about trying to push somebody through a funnel, and it's more about trying to build mental availability and recall around specific pain points that your product solves. We call these category entry points. So it's the point at which a buyer moves in market for the category. And when you hit high audience penetration and high frequency with paid ads specifically, then everybody in the audience knows who you are, the problem that you solve, and you naturally will attract people who are in market right now, who have a problem right now, because the ad speaks to them. But then you're also building the right memory structures so that as somebody moves from kind of out market to in market, they also think of you too and then add you to the vendor list. And so he did a good bit of research that this theory actually kind of worked. So he did loads of controlled experiments. And so when I took over at KlientBoost's, I was like, okay, I have this tool Primer that I've wanted to use for ages. This would be a great experiment because it's a totally new audience. We've never used it for targeting before. Let's just target this for 12 months and see what happens. And then 12 months later, we're in this position where I think we spent we spent about 28% less on paid ads last year and decreased acquisition costs by 14%, which is crazy because everybody's complaining about rising ad costs right
Sure.
now. And then we also hit 2 times our pipeline goal. So we were meant to hit 440 SQLs last year, and we hit right around 800. And so for me, yeah, it was it was a big success.
Amazing.
The other thing I would add there is this was the bulk of defensible pipeline that we could attribute directly to ad channels came from the demand generation layer where there's no retargeting layered into that. So retargeting actually had fewer attributed SQLs for us than demand generation, which is also crazy. 'Cause if you read most people on LinkedIn, they're like, the goal is get people into the funnel with the top of funnel content and then convert them in the retargeting layer. And it's like, eliminate the need for retargeting with the demand generation campaigns that hit high audience penetration and high frequency. Like if you're hitting somebody with, 10 frequency every 90 days, you don't really need to aggressively retarget them that much, especially if you have a good
Right.
selection, a good selection of ads, that kind of communicate a cohesive narrative.
And talk to me about that a little bit. And let's click into the
Yeah.
high frequency argument because that runs counter to how I would say almost every performance marketer thinks, right? They think about frequency as a bad thing. They think about audience and creative fatigue and always needing to kind of, expand. What?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very contrarian view.
So where it comes from for me is I was at the time I didn't feel so lucky. I used to be really frustrated, but back in like 2019, 2020, I had a client at an agency I was working at then who, for whatever reason, just didn't want to update their creative. I was working for a very classic old school marketing manager who was just all about brand. She was like, we worked really hard getting the brand right, getting the message right. I just want to run this creative. And even if I wanted to update it, I don't have the budget. So you stuck with this same creative on Meta for the foreseeable future and ran the same creative for 12 months, the same audience for 12 months, and sometimes tweak copy, but for the most part, it was exactly the same images. And I noticed that 1 month click through rate would go up, the next month it would go down. And so some people will see that and say, oh, that's ad fatigue. But then the next month it would go back up again. And then the next month it would go even higher. And then the following month it would come down a little bit. And what I realized was it was really just following the trend of demand. So this was a real estate company. Typically will sell more houses and have more people interested in property through the summer months. And so right up until summer, it looked like we had ad fatigue and we were aggressively pitching them new creative. And then suddenly I couldn't pitch new creative anymore because performance was going through the roof. That's why I think a little bit more counter to the average performance marketer, because there are so many other examples where I've seen that happen in ad platforms that what you think of when you're only looking at things in short look back windows is you will think something is a performance dip when it's just demand, and that's it's literally how markets work. And so that's why I think about it a little differently. And then also, I think this is classic marketing thinking before we were able to track everything and attribute everything to a click, was that the goal is to just have a really powerful message, to be pain point focused, to sell in content, and to get it in front of as many people as possible, or at least as many relevant people as possible. And same thing again, I started experimenting with that sort of philosophy with clients when I joined KlientBoost, and then just saw it working, where we would run cold campaigns and we were generating demos within like a month because the focus was on how can we get this in front of as many of these people as possible versus how can we drive as much pipeline as possible. And it's not necessarily that ads shouldn't drive pipeline. I believe they should, and it's a problem if they're not generating pipeline. But sometimes by focusing on that too much versus the reach and frequency, it can actually pull away from performance.
How you measure performance is really ads should drive pipeline, right? But
Yeah.
measuring the performance is, pretty challenging these days, right?
Yeah.
So how do you think about that? I know you're a big fan of Dream Data. How are you guys using that to kind of help you
Yeah.
optimize campaigns versus just going for the reach and penetration?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's not just measuring marketing that's hard. It's measuring marketing and then proving that it's working to execs. That's where it's really hard. I have a few different thoughts on why that is. A lot of the time, it's just an understanding issue where I think marketers maybe got overexcited with touch based attribution. And so pitched it as this kind of panacea that was going to allow them to finally show execs exactly what's working and what's not working in marketing. But then the reality is, with increasing privacy features on browsers, for example, more people rejecting cookies, 95% of people on iOS opt out of tracking. Essentially, we went from having loads of data to pretty much what you would call like a data black hole. And so that means that marketers need to change the narrative. And so there's one issue with measurement is trying to find like a single source of truth. So I'm a really big fan of measurement triangulation, which is taking multiple pieces of data and using them to build a full picture. So you've got like almost like different puzzle pieces that slot together to give you the full picture. And so for me, things actually wouldn't start with dream data. So where I start is with like a correlation analysis, which is just at the very highest level based on like spend fluctuations on ad platforms and versus different metrics within these ad platforms. Where are the correlations? And so that's a really good starting point to understand which channels, for example, have the biggest lift and which ones don't. And so once you have that, then you can start forming some hypotheses around, okay, this was actually what inspired me to do the B2B SaaS segmented lift test last November. Was looking at our correlation analysis, there was just LinkedIn ads for us is basically as simple as more money in equals more money out. It doesn't necessarily scale linearly, but it's pretty much that simple. And well, now I can form this hypothesis based on this correlation analysis that I've run. I need to validate it because, correlation doesn't equal causation. And so then I created an isolated test with a cold audience we've never targeted before and ran this high reach and frequency approach to that audience just in a 1 month period where I said, okay, we got to hit 50% plus audience penetration, 10 plus frequency over a 30-day period. We ended up getting a 50% increase versus the previous 2 months in B2B SaaS SQLs. And 8 of those SQLs I was able to directly connect to the companies that we targeted with that campaign. So there's another piece of information that I can add to the story that I'm already being able to tell to the executives around, look, LinkedIn ads is as simple for us as more money in equals more money out. Here's how I can prove it. I ran a test to validate it. And then after that, I use tools like Dream Data and even the conversion lift analysis tool in Primer, for example, to give me another piece that strengthens the whole argument. And so for us, we only targeted audiences using Primer in 2025, aside of that one small test. And the only reason I didn't use Primer is because I wanted it to be a controlled test with unique prospects in the audience. So with Primer, essentially what we're able to do is Primer can create holdout audiences within the audience that we're targeting. And so that means that if we're targeting 100,000 people, they might pull 20,000 people out and measure the close rate to pipeline of that, small segment versus the close rate of these people that we know have seen ads because we've been targeting them across multiple channels throughout the year. And so for us, what we saw was LinkedIn ads was maybe 80% of the budget of the primer audiences that we targeted. And so we had a 15x lift in conversion rate. Somebody saw an ad versus didn't see an ad. And so when I put those 3 pieces of information in front of the board, one just makes the other stronger. And then Dream Data is like the cherry on top because Dream Data uses data-driven multi-touch attribution. And it's like these LinkedIn ads campaigns that don't really get that many clicks. When we use data-driven attribution based on analyzing all of our closed deals and seeing if a closed deal has more or fewer, touch points with LinkedIn ads, is it more or less likely to convert? It's able to then give us a kind of like influenced pipeline number. And so then on top of that, LinkedIn ads for us, for example, was the highest ROI paid channel by like a significant margin. The ROI on LinkedIn ads for us is 13x, at least influenced is what we see in Dream Data. On Primer, the lift was So those numbers are actually, they're
Pretty
pretty
close.
close. Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty close.
Amazing. Talk to me more about the targeting side. Why did you choose to only build your audiences in Primer versus building them natively in LinkedIn or other ways?
Yeah, good question. So we'd had a couple conversations at that point, and so the way you described to me that Primer was approaching building the audiences themselves gave me a lot more confident they were going to be accurate. So one thing that's really, really important for making this high reach and frequency approach work is your targeting has to be bulletproof. Like you cannot be targeting the wrong people at all. And so again, from years of running LinkedIn ads mostly natively. I experimented a little bit with company lists, but even company lists can be kind of problematic because you still rely on LinkedIn's account level, profile level targeting, which can be a bit hit and miss too. And so, with the reason I went to Primer, like predominantly was confidence that it was going to allow me to get my ads in front of the right people. But also, when I jumped into the platform, it was a lot easier to build and update account lists in Primer than it is in any other tool. When I've run ABM in the past, it's like you have this master document of company accounts that's always out of date. It's an absolute nightmare to download the CSV and then re-upload it to LinkedIn. Then you have to wait 3 days to target your audience every time you've done that. Whereas with Primer, all of that was happening organically, and so that was one of the big reasons. For me, yeah, just ease of being able to update audiences and confidence in the accuracy of those audiences, and it works. So if anybody that's like been in LinkedIn ads a lot is listening to this is going to sound bonkers. We only had to exclude like 2 job titles in the whole of 2025 from LinkedIn ads. We basically didn't have to touch job title exclusions at all.
I love that. And I wanna click into the
Yeah,
inaccuracies in
yeah,
LinkedIn. And especially because like CPMs are going through the roof on LinkedIn right now. And I feel like people are hunting for efficiencies on LinkedIn. What I've observed, LinkedIn doesn't do exact match, right? On job
yeah,
titles, for example. It does kind of like a fuzzy match or it expands. It's like you put in, you look at your criteria, you put in, I don't know, VP of marketing, head of marketing, chief marketing officer. And then you look through your audience composition and it's sort of like, wait, what? Like, why is there a marketing specialist in here? Why is there business strategy specialist? If these are the titles, right? It's because they're titles related to chief marketing officer. It even says it right here. So it goes broader. And that's in their interest, right? So of course they do that. Is that what you're talking about when you're talking about sort of some of the accuracy issues?
yeah. It's pretty much exactly that. Um, because you can make those LinkedIn audiences work, but it just takes so much audience cleanup. I mean, I've been in accounts before where there's like hundreds of excluded job titles, which is like, if you want to target ahead of marketing, you should be able to just target ahead of marketing. And I think one of the things I liked about Primer too, which is there's a really annoying kind of quirk with LinkedIn where if you target job titles, you can't also narrow the audience by job seniority. It's really frustrating. So you can't say, I want to target a chief marketing officer or a VP of marketing, and then it's going to serve your ads to marketing specialists or marketing executives. Or even the obvious one is the business development, which is like that role's so far removed from what marketing is. It's not even funny. And so you can't then at least reduce the amount of like low quality inventory you're getting in terms of like just bad fit job seniorities, like entry level training, even senior roles are not that valuable for most companies. And so what we did is we ran like 2 layers of protection against it. So Primer allows you to do both. So in Primer, we can do job title and seniority. So already we have a layer of protection in the audience as it's going into the platform. But then
Mhm.
when we're in the platform, we were then able to say, okay, we're also going to add another layer of seniority filtering to only target directors, managers, VPs, and CXOs so that it's also ignoring more of that noise. And so we found that it was exclusively marketing and marketing adjacent roles that we're targeting. And by that I mean there was no business development in there. There were just the people we wanted to target, which was head of marketing, head of growth, head of product. It was roles actually related to marketing, not as you say, this kind of fuzzy match that's very, very, very similar to Google's broad match by the sounds of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. That's a good analogy. I want to come back to what you were talking, I think you painted a really clear picture about how you assess kind of like the overall performance at a channel and even at a potentially at a campaign or audience level. But in the context of this kind of high reach, high frequency, high penetration uh, strategy, how do you think about ad level optimization?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the way I approach that is based on at the beginning of last year, I had a really good conversation with our director of business intelligence, a guy called Reese Garcia. And he said to me, he also introduced me to the concept of like measurement triangulation, which kind of put a name to something that I'd been thinking of for a while. So I love when that happens. And he said to me, the way I think about it is use in-platform data for in-platform decisions, and then you use business data for business decisions. So what it means by that is if you have bulletproof tracking in place, the conditions upon which all the ads operate are essentially the same. And so when I'm in platform, I'm using offline conversion tracking to look at ads, which ads are generating, convert to pipeline, which ones aren't. And there's lots of people that say to me, yeah, but ads might be getting credit that aren't meant to have credit. I'm like, that's fine, because the goal for me in platform isn't to give an ad credit in the traditional sense. If I then go to the board and say, this ad generated X number of pipelines, because that's also not how the system's designed. But what does happen is there are certain ads that will receive the same amount of reach, the same amount of frequency over an extended period of time. And for some reason, they just have a disproportionately higher number of pipeline attributed to them. And for me, that's a really important signal that I can use in platform to say, hey, if we want to improve efficiency of this channel and generate more pipeline, I should probably start doing more like ads like that.
Yeah.
And then do less content like the ads that just don't have as much attributed pipeline. And I think this is probably a strange POV because it maybe runs counter to everything else that I've said so far. But I do tend to see a pretty strong correlation between landing page click-through rates and conversion rate to pipeline. So if you have an ad that's more likely to drive clicks, especially to a high intent page, like a demo page or a product page or something like that, generally speaking, that ad's going to have, more attributed pipeline as well. And so that's another thing that I kind of factor in as a little bit of a leading indicator sometimes as well, which is which of these ads specifically, because LinkedIn can also be a little bit weird about how it tells you clicks. So you really want to isolate landing page click-through rate, see which ads are driving the most there. Because some companies can't afford to wait like 6 months for, a deal to move through pipeline before they make ad optimizations. And that can be a good kind of precursor to look at.
Cool. Makes sense.
Good.
Speaking of LinkedIn, are there certain formats, campaign types that you tend to recommend? And if so, why?
Yes, there are, with a big caveat that the targeting should be right first. And some form of math should have been done to work out if the budget's right for the audience. Providing those two things are in place, the number one thing is consolidation. So it's always going to be better to have fewer campaigns from a reach and frequency perspective. The benefit from that as well is you stop. LinkedIn says this doesn't happen, but I've ran tests on it and it definitely does. If you bid on the same audience multiple times over multiple campaigns, it drives up the CPMs. That makes it more expensive. And so you want to lean it up as much as possible. In terms of what works, thought leader ads is an obvious one. Thought leader ads for us was one of the most efficient formats last year. Another that gets overlooked, I think, because people are scared of it, is CTV. But CTV has really accessible CPMs at the moment, again, because a lot of people are afraid to use it. So it's just not very competitive. Another wild card is a format that I call ungated document ads. So instead of trying to force people into a funnel with these gated, usually low quality ebooks that aren't that helpful, just give them away for free. So what we do is we just create really valuable pain point focused content. And then at the end of each carousel, if somebody's read that right through to the end, chances are they're probably in market, or this problem is so painful it wouldn't take much to move them in market. And so then we just put a CTA at the end that's like, by the way, if you want us to take a look at your ad account to see if we can fix this problem for you, here's the link to go and, to get in touch with us. And so that format worked really well. What did not work well for us last year was branded single image ads. And that really hurt my ego because I spent so much time creating ads that I just thought were fantastic, and this happens a lot in marketing. But yeah, single image ads for us had 4 times higher in-platform acquisition cost than thought leader ads, CTV, and document ads. Video also worked really well. So we just took snippets from the podcast, put them in vertical format. And that had a pretty appealing acquisition cost too. But yeah, if I had to, I would say thought leader ads and CTV would be the big ones I would have on nonstop. And then if you have enough budget, layer in the ungated document ads too.
Makes sense. When you think about other channels, what other channels play a role outside of, yeah, LinkedIn is obviously the dominant one for you guys,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
where are you going else?
It varies for different businesses. And so for us, Reddit ads didn't really work very well for us. We tried to make it work. I would be down to try it again as well. I don't think we did the best job of it, but like meta ads worked surprisingly well for us. So we were able to there was still a lead quality issue, but it was conversion rate to like SQL or, qualified ICP lead would cost about the same as LinkedIn. When we, took private audiences and put them onto Meta. So for us, that worked really well. But then I have another client who I'm kind of, supporting at the moment, and Reddit is working for them. So they have a different audience, right? So they're a tech audience. They're targeting like software developers, etc. So Reddit's working really well, whereas we're targeting marketers who love Instagram. Meta works really well for us. But yeah, people always say, B2C channels don't work for B2B. It's definitely not the case. You can make those channels work. You've just got to put the right audience into them. So if I was to just performance marketer love to say, let the creative do the targeting in Meta. That does not work for B2Bs. B2B was reading a post from Pep Lahar today where he's like, the average buying committee is like 5 people. So how can an ad platform know if you're in market or out market when it's got to understand 5 completely different people's habits who are always going to be a completely different set of people? It's just not going to figure it out. And so if you are going to try those B2C channels, it's the same approach, right? If you feed good quality targeting into it, you probably will be able to make it work, especially if it's a spot that you already have an active audience on.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it makes sense. Any other tips or any questions I didn't ask you that I should have?
The only tip I think I would finish with is coming right back to the beginning. Again, a tool like Primer's phenomenal, but it does require you to have done the ICP research well in the first place. So if you're just expecting Primer to like solve a demand engine problem, it's not going to do that. But if you know exactly who you're targeting, that's when a tool like Primer can really become a powerful addition to a marketing strategy.
And maybe to add on to that, it's not just the ICP understanding. I think it's also the content and pay. Look, I mean, that's
Yeah.
part of it, is the understanding what content and pains are going to resonate. Yeah. That's really, really key as well. I actually think it totally makes sense how you use the in-platform performance data to guide the optimization of your actual ad creative. To do that though, are you finding that you're doing a lot more on sort of server side implementations and making sure you're feeding conversion data in?
Like proof, especially for, website forms, specifically server side tracking is an absolute must. I think you'll lose anywhere from 30 to 50% of conversion data if you don't have server side set up, which is crazy. Equally, if not more important than server side, especially the way I think of it is server side for me is like aggressively important on Google ads and less important on LinkedIn ads, which isn't still important. I don't want to downplay its importance, but LinkedIn ads is less about the direct click to conversion. It's more about, building recall. And so with LinkedIn ads, what becomes really important is offline conversion tracking. And that's sending the the CRM data back into the platform so that you can understand not just what's driving leads, but what's driving, conversion rate to SQLs. And the way I look at it, like I measure everything. We're measured against SQLs, but I still optimize everything around closed won. So I'm looking for what's actually driving growth at the business and what isn't. And that can be really illuminating because a lot of kind of high level vanity metrics start becoming obsolete once you have that offline conversion data. Classic example for us is on Google Ads. We actually literally just wrapped up a test last month where we tested phrase match and had loads of MQLs. Cost per MQL was 50% less than exact match, but 0% of it converted to SQLs. Whereas in the same period, we were spending like $1,000 for, which is crazy, for an MQL on the exact match campaign. But it's like close to 100% conversion rate to SQL. It's like, depending on the month, it's like 60 to 80% conversion rate to SQL. And then, like another 60 to 80% conversion rate to, that's probably exaggerated, like 40 to 60% conversion rate to close customer after the SQL. And so we wouldn't have been able to understand that without that offline conversion data. So most companies will just keep pouring money into those keywords that don't drive business growth. And that's when you end up having those conversations with execs who say, hey, we're not seeing any pipeline lift here. And it's like, there really isn't one because none of it converted to pipeline. And you can see it when you send the right data into the platforms.
Yeah, 100%. Do you have any other tools that you use to make that happen?
For offline conversion tracking, I actually use, so we send it directly and they're from HubSpot, but as a kind of fail safe, I also use Dream Data to do it. So Dream Data has those conversions in Dream Data. So I send it back through in Dream Data. And I tend to trust Dream Data a little bit more. It's much better at the connecting actions to company accounts specifically. That's kind of why I like Dream Data. So you can, if for whatever reason it's not able to connect at the contact level, sometimes you can see it at the company level, which is really a useful fail-safe to have in an ad platform.